One introduction RFK view the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RFK view purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to residents against wood smoke emission particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents against wood smoke emission particulates, or RASEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RFK podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, residents against wood smoke emission particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 57DHXXN September 19, 2025 RFK Junior ACIP holds COVID-19 votes postpones Hepatitis B vote. In episode 57DHXXN1, as farm aid reaches 40 years, it deals with familiar farming crises. 2 Kamala Harris Takeaways from 107 Days, the new book by Kamala Harris. 3 CDC vaccine panel postpones 1 vote and reverses another amid confusion. The RFK Junior Vaccine Committee raises new hurdles to COVID shots. The panel recommended that people consult a health professional before receiving a COVID vaccine. Left unclear was whether Americans can still walk into pharmacies for shots. 4 Shawn Fain Who Pledged to reform UAW faces internal dissent. 5 Democrats in Senate not on board for Trump funding bill. 6 Kamala Harris Angry and disappointed. Kamala Harris critical of Joe Biden. In new book 7A RFK Junior ACIP holds COVID-19 votes postpones Hepatitis B vote. RFK Junior vaccine panel drops plan for vote on newborn Hepatitis B shots. The federal vaccine committee appointed by Health Secretary RFK Junior voted unanimously on Friday to further limit access to COVID vaccines, recommending that adults 65 and older receive the shots only after discussing the potential benefits and risks with a healthcare provider. The panel also said that everyone from 6 months to 64 years old could get the vaccine after consulting with a provider, but it was unclear whether that contradicted the Food and Drug Administration FDA authorization of the shots only for adults over 65 and younger people with certain health conditions. Together, the decisions raise questions about whether Americans can continue to walk into their neighborhood pharmacies for routine vaccinations, or whether in some states they will first need the permission of a doctor. 7B, according to the PBS Newshour September 19, 2025, the panel declined to require a prescription for the COVID-19 vaccine. 8 United States Senate fails to pass short-term funding bill that would avert government shutdown. Headlines: The New York Times, September 19, 2025. Cancer Medicine and Science FDA OK's new Keytruda shot for cancer. The New York Times Consumers Allergies Fall allergies. What to know about causes, symptoms, and treatment. The New York Times Consumers Debtors debt collection lawsuits are rising. Here is what to do to fight back. The New York Times Consumers cosplay robots peak SF on a Friday night. Is a robot fight. The New York Times Consumers food amateur restaurant critic Marilyn Haggerty, whose Olive Garden review went viral, dies at 99. The New York Times Consumers Food Recipes carrot orange olive oil cake recipe. Consumers Food Recipes grilled little gems with creamy tarragon dressing recipe. Consumers friendship or business. My friend is trying to convert me into a client. What to do. The New York Times Consumers Furniture. We tested viral boneless sofas. Are they worth it? Reviews by Wirecutter. Consumers Germany porcelain. German porcelain becomes a jewelry accent. The New York Times Consumers glues and do nots. Here is how to stick or unstick anything. The New York Times Consumers phones. The iPhone Air is the Apple most impressive phone in years, but most people should not buy it. Reviews by Wirecutter. Consumers phones. Which iPhone should I get? Reviews by Wirecutter. Consumers watches. The Apple Watch is the best smartwatch for iPhone owners. Reviews by Wirecutter. Democrats. California Soros gives $10 million to Newsom redistricting fight. The New York Times Democrats opinion. Democrats, your job is to defend democracy. The New York Times. 1 Farmers United States as farm aid reaches 40 years, it deals with familiar farming crises. The New York Times farm aid turns 40 and returns to crisis mode. This Saturday, star-studded concert will air on TV for the first time in years as the hotline for farmers gets more calls about a mix of complicated problems. Photo of Neil Young, Willie Nelson, and John Mellencamp at the first Farm Aid concert in 1985. This 2025 event comes as farmers face the bleakest economic conditions in years. Excerpts edited by RFK for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, September 19, 2025. There was never supposed to be a hotline. The first Farm Aid benefit concert organized by Willie Nelson in 1985 was intended as a one-off. 1-800-FARM-AID was the phone number people watching the concert on television could call to donate money, but the next day, the number received more calls from farmers asking to talk to Willie. Organizers said Nelson and other concert organizers quickly realized there was an ongoing need, and Farm Aid concerts and the Farmer Help Hotline have continued ever since. Farm Aid 40 takes place in Minneapolis on Saturday, September 20th, 2025, with Willie Nelson, Bob Dylan, Neil Young, John Mellencamp, and others performing. They will pay all their own costs, and ticket revenue and money raised will go to Farm Aid, now one of the most well-established nonprofits within agriculture. The 40th anniversary concert comes at an auspicious time as American farmers face perhaps the bleakest economic conditions since the 1980s farm crisis that spurred the first Farm Aid. Prices are down across a range of crops. So many growers will lose money on each acre they harvest this fall, and farm bankruptcies are beginning to rise. Earlier this month, hundreds of agriculture organizations banded together to implore Congress pass a new farm bill, which was supposed to happen in 2023. Instead, the old farm bill has been extended twice. The Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins said on Monday the department was working with Congress to give farmers economic aid this fall. Such efforts put farm aid in a difficult spot. The organization has lobbied Congress before, like when the Agricultural Credit Act was passed in 1987, but while the group wants farmers to receive financial help, the Farm Aid vision for American farming, small and medium family farms growing healthy and nutritious food for Americans who live nearby, is often at odds with farmers who grow single crops destined for foreign markets. Farmers face the constant challenges of competing in an ever-consolidating market that favors corporations trying to earn a fair price in unfair markets, and weather, including extreme weather and natural disasters exacerbated by climate change. Farm Aid wrote in its latest financial filing to the Internal Revenue Service, Generations United States Book Review, What Happened to Millennials by Charlie Wells. The New York Times. 2 Kamala Harris autobiographical story of her campaign for president in 2024. Takeaways from 107 Days, the new book by Kamala Harris. The New York Times. Excerpts edited by RFK for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, September 18, 2025. The title of the new book by Kamala Harris, 107 Days, hits the reader on the head with a central argument about why she lost the presidential race to Trump, I did not have enough time, she wrote, not enough time to craft a message that broke through to the economic concerns of Gen Z and Latino voters who helped sway the election in the Trump favor, not enough time, or she wrote enough help from President Biden and his team to combat a right-wing media apparatus that tore in her, not enough time to warn Americans that Trump was serious about attacking democratic institutions, crushing dissent, and unraveling delicate diplomatic bonds, all the while she was juggling a compressed campaign and trying to figure out how to counter Trump, an opponent who publicly attacked her in personal terms but praised her profusely in private. She should have done more to strategize against him. She wrote in the book, Ms. Harris was more interested in assigning blame to Trump for the current state of politics than to Biden herself or other Democrats, and she left open the idea that she would return to politics in the near future. Here are 5 takeaways from the book. Trump attacked her in public and praised her. One-on-one Trump can be solicitous when the cameras are not rolling, and Ms. Harris experienced this side of him on 2 phone calls she detailed in the book. The first came after a man was arrested last September and charged with trying to assassinate the former president at his golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida. Trump had blamed the episode on the Harris campaign rhetoric, and a billionaire benefactor, Elon Musk, had publicly mused about why no one had shot Ms. Harris or Biden. Still, Ms. Harris asked her staff to put her on a call with Trump. You have done a great job, you really have. Trump told her, my only problem is it makes it very hard for me to be angry at you. It is like, what am I going to do? How do I say bad things about you now? Well then, do not, she replied. I am going to tone it down. Trump said, I will. You are going to see. Trump then told her that his daughter Ivanka was a big fan and asked her to say hello to her husband Doug Emhoff for him. Ms. Harris wrote that she did not fall for his magnanimity. He is a con man. He is really good at it. She wrote, I had readied myself for a phone conversation with Hyde, but Dr. Jekyll had picked up the call. She described one other call, the one in which she conceded the election to Trump, the phone call that he had never made to Biden. She noted, she wrote that she pleaded for him to work to bring the country together and that she knew in the moment it was a loss. Because I am going to be so nice and respectful. Trump said, you are a tough, smart customer, and I say that with great respect. And you also have a beautiful name. I got use of that name. It is Kamala. He pronounced her name correctly on that call after mispronouncing it in public all through the campaign. She said it was reckless for Biden to run again. MS Harris, a longtime prosecutor, speaks often about the work she has done to correct injustice, and she has been clear about why she has done this work for the people, has been her campaign refrain. There was no conspiracy to cover up cognitive decline, she wrote, and if there had been, she would have publicly said so, but it was clear that Biden got tired and showed his age in physical and verbal stumbles. She joined other Democrats who have since publicly said it was a mistake not to dissuade Biden from running. She wrote that it had become a mantra that the decision to run remains squarely with Biden and his wife Jill. She delicately laid the blame at the Biden feet in retrospect. I think it was recklessness. She wrote the stakes were simply too high. This was not a choice that should have been left to the ego of an individual, the ambition of an individual. It should have been more than a personal decision. In another section, she wrote that the Bidens did not want her help until it was really needed, when he was fighting to save his campaign after a disastrous presidential debate, when Ms. Harris and Emhoff appeared on the Truman balcony of the White House with the Biden family on July 4, 2024. The First Lady pulled Emhoff aside and brusquely quizzed him about his loyalties. In her retelling of how that moment felt, Ms. Harris let her husband do the sharply worded talking. They hide you away for 4 years, give you impossible jobs, do not correct the record when those tasks are mischaracterized, never fight back when you are attacked. Emhoff said to her, using an expletive, now finally they know you are an asset and they need you to reassure the American people, and still they have to ask if we are loyal. Once he was out of the race, the president got in her way minutes before she was to step on stage at a presidential debate in September 2024. Ms. Harris received a call from Biden. Ms. Harris wrote that she had a genuine rapport with Biden and her personal reverence for him did shine through. At several points her hurt and confusion were palpable when she recounted several things he did that she felt may have jeopardized her chances of beating Trump. Minutes before she was to step on stage at a presidential debate in September 2024, she received a call from Biden. I just could not understand why he would call me right now and make it all about himself. Ms. Harris wrote, distracting me with worry about hostile power brokers in the biggest city of the most important swing state. There are several scenes like this in which the Biden ego hurt her. When Ms. Harris needed him the most, she struggled to balance her loyalty with Biden against her belief that Trump posed a dire threat to the country. Throughout the book, she wrestled with the choices she made not to separate herself from Biden. She offered a view of what could have been. As a narrator, Ms. Harris told her story at a practiced remove, letting glimpses of an alternate future do the work. Ms. Harris wrote that she would have chosen Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary under Biden, as a running mate, but she did not feel that the country was ready for a black woman and a gay man to carry a ticket. He would have been an ideal partner, she wrote, if I were a straight white man, but we were already asking a lot of America to accept a black woman married to a Jewish man. But knowing what was at stake, it was too big of a risk. She walked the reader through the thought process of picking a running mate. She did not choose Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona because she feared what the brutalities of a modern political campaign would do to someone she regarded as an American ideal of selfless service. She added, I could not afford to test Mark Kelly and that ugly grinder. Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania seemed more interested in defining the role for himself than helping her win, but she and her staff liked Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota for his charm and believed his background balanced hers. Throughout the book, she struggled to reconcile her personal affection for him with disappointment. In moments, she felt he stumbled during a vice presidential debate against J.D. Vance, whom she called a shapeshifter. Walz began nodding along. Ms. Harris was aghast. You are not here to make friends with the guy who is attacking your running mate, she said to the television screen as she watched in passages that recounted the Trump campaign maligning her as a DEI hire and the former president questioning her race. The book by Ms. Harris showed the reader just how much it changed in the months after Trump took office. She closed the book wondering if trying to bring change from within the system was enough. I will be with the people in towns and communities where I can listen to their ideas on how we rebuild trust, empathy, and a government worthy of the ideals of this country. She wrote that it had been bittersweet to encounter people who had voted for the vision of of America she had offered with her candidacy, we had planned for everything it seemed, she wrote, except the actual result. Mississippi consumers' restaurant meals, why restaurant diners are paying more everywhere. The New York Times TV stars Democrats, why the media industry is bracing for more blowback. The New York Times movie star Democrat, as an activist Robert Redford understood the power of celebrity. The New York Times movie star Democrat, how Robert Redford helped shape celebrity style at Sundance. The New York Times Nature, she is starting a blood bank for Zeus. The New York Times Nature, so a bear walks into a New Jersey dollar store. The New York Times. 3 RFK Junior vaccine denial. CDC vaccine panel postpones one vote and reverses another amid confusion. The New York Times vaccine panel postpones one vote and reverses another amid confusion. Committee members delayed indefinitely a vote on a hepatitis B vaccine for newborns because they did not feel ready to make a decision. Photo of 5 people in suits watch a presentation from a meeting table. Some members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice, including from left Dr. Joseph Hibble, Dr. Raymond Pollock, Vicky Pebsworth, and Professor Retsef Levi during its meeting on Thursday. Reporting from Atlanta, the CDC headquarters city of the Centers for Disease Control. The CDC excerpts edited by Rozep for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. September 19th. 2025, the RFK Junior Vaccine Committee raises new hurdles to COVID shots. The panel recommended that people consult a health professional before receiving a COVID vaccine. Left unclear was whether Americans can still walk into pharmacies for shots. The Federal Vaccine Committee, appointed by Health Secretary RFK Junior, voted unanimously on Friday to further limit access to COVID vaccines, recommending that adults 65 and older receive the shots only after discussing the potential benefits and risks with a healthcare provider. The panel also said that everyone from 6 months to 64 years old could get the vaccine after consulting with a provider, but it was unclear whether that contradicted the Food and Drug Administration FDA authorization of the shots only for adults over 65 and younger people with certain health conditions. Together, the decisions raise questions about whether Americans can continue to walk into their neighborhood pharmacies for routine vaccinations, or whether in some states they will first need the permission of a doctor. The votes came on the second meeting day of a committee that was hurriedly assembled by RFK Jr. Most of the panelists are first-time members, and their inexperience seemed to contribute to the confusion that marred both days of the meeting. About half of the committee members were appointed to the panel earlier this week. The recommendations approved by the panel, called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, were less restrictive than many had expected, but they will still make it more difficult for pharmacists in some states to administer the shots to older adults. About 2/3 of Americans received the 2024 COVID vaccine at a pharmacy or a drugstore. We think that it is appropriate to bring it to something that is being discussed between a physician or medical provider and a patient, said Retsef Levi, the committee member who led the COVID work group and presented the proposed votes. The nation is no longer in an emergency situation, he said. RFK Jr. had already restricted access to the vaccine for healthy pregnant women and healthy children. The Food and Drug Administration authorized this 2025 COVID shot only for adults 65 and older or for other adults with certain medical conditions. The panel also unanimously voted to recommend that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention describe the risks of COVID vaccines to patients and healthcare providers. Providers are already legally required to provide patients with a sheet explaining the risks and benefits, but the committee stopped short of approving a recommendation that would also have required Americans to have a prescription for the vaccines. That proposal elicited the strongest disagreement among the panelists, with some members noting that a significant percentage of Americans, particularly those living in rural areas, do not have access to a healthcare provider. It did not pass most of the committee. Members have publicly opposed COVID vaccines or vaccine mandates, so their decision to limit access to the shots was not entirely surprising, but the language and the specifics of the restrictions alarmed some public health experts. There will be preventable deaths that result from these decisions, said Dr. Lakshmi Panajitakalos, who oversaw the CDC work group on the COVID vaccine before she resigned in June. Having people without vaccine and clinical expertise having the power to harm so much of the public is unbearable, she said, referring to the panelists. The chaos from the first day of a meeting of the Federal Vaccine Committee, appointed by Health Secretary RFK Jr., bled into the second day as the panel reversed one decision and indefinitely postponed a vote on a hepatitis B vaccine they had already deferred once on Friday morning. The committee voted not to allow a federal vaccine program to cover the cost of a combination vaccine that protects against measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, or chickenpox. This reversed a vote on Thursday to allow coverage, apparently because some members had misunderstood the way it was worded, and the panelists said they felt unready to decide whether to limit the use of a vaccine for hepatitis B that is typically given to all newborns. Some said they still had questions about the safety of the vaccine, while others seemed relieved that the panel did not make what they saw as a rash decision that might harm children. We are more prudent when we are cautious, Dr. Joseph Hibble, a neuroscientist formerly at the National Institutes of Health, said as he voted to table the vote. The Thursday session ended with the panel members at odds. A hot microphone caught one panelist calling another committee member an idiot, although it was unclear who was speaking then. Friday session 2 at times devolved into raised voices and sharp-toned remarks. The decisions of the committee, which is meeting at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, are of enormous importance. Most private insurers are required to cover the shots it recommends, although they may choose to cover those not recommended, and many state policies on vaccines are tied to the guidelines of the committee. At least some members seemed aligned with the RFK Jr. goal of making sweeping changes to routine childhood immunizations. RFK Jr. has maintained for years that children receive too many shots, and he has incorrectly claimed that the vaccines in use today were never properly tested. Most of the panelists are first-time members, and their inexperience seemed to lead to the confusion that marred the meeting. About half of the committee members were appointed to the panel earlier this week. On Thursday, the committee voted to rescind the use of the MMRV vaccine in children under 4. A second vote was on whether the Vaccines for Children program, which provides shots to about half of American children, should continue to cover the cost of the shot. The committee voted yes on Thursday, and then reversed that decision on Friday in another vote. Approving which shots the vaccine program should cover is a key function of the committee, but some members did not appear to know how their decision would affect coverage, several members said. Thursday that they were unclear what they were voting for. One abstained from the vote, citing his confusion as the reason. The members themselves seemed uncomfortably aware of the optics. The panelists have enormous depth and knowledge about vaccines, Dr. Kuldorf acknowledged on Friday, but they are rookies when it comes to how the ACIP committee typically makes decisions. In June, Kennedy fired all 17 previous members of the committee and appointed 7 new members, many of whom are aligned with his vaccine skepticism. He announced another 5 members earlier this week. Members of the ACIP are typically vetted for months to years before they are invited to join. The panelists were distracted by small studies that raised safety concerns, said Dr. Amy Middleman, who heads pediatrics and adolescent medicine at Case Western Reserve University. She is a liaison to the Committee from the Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine. Every vaccine and drug carries risks, she said, but the scientific challenge of the committee is to determine whether the benefits outweigh the risk. Public health experts who study hepatitis B said they were pleased that the committee postponed the vote on that vaccine. Tabling the vote is appropriate and a relief, said Dr. Noelle P. Nelson, a senior author on the current guidelines for the vaccine and a former leader of the CDC hepatitis vaccines workgroup. This discussion should not be rushed. Babies are routinely immunized for hepatitis B within 24 hours after birth. The committee was scheduled to vote on whether the shot should instead be recommended only for those newborns whose mothers were known to be infected. Other babies, the motion said, should be immunized only after they are at least 1 month old. Hepatitis B experts noted that the vaccine has nearly eliminated maternal transmission of the disease in the United States, slashing the incidence to fewer than 20 cases a year from about 20,000 a year before 1991. The experts said delaying the first dose of the vaccine would increase the risk to newborns because many cases in pregnant women are missed despite a long-standing recommendation to test them. Routinely infected women may also not be identified because of inaccurate results or because of problems reporting or interpreting the results. A universal birth dose recommendation is the only way to ensure we do not miss vaccinating newborns exposed to this virus, including those whose mothers were not tested during pregnancy, said Dr. John W. Ward, director of the Coalition for Global Hepatitis Elimination and a former head of the CDC Viral Hepatitis Division. TV stars Trump actions, the ABC suspension of Kimmel, and the Trump chilling effect on late-night TV. The New York Times, TV stars Trump actions, how the next star proposed TV merger is tied to the Jimmy Kimmel suspension. The New York Times, TV stars Trump actions in pressuring ABC over Kimmel. Trump may have crossed a constitutional line. The New York Times, TV stars Trump actions, in their own words, Trump and top officials change tone on free speech. The New York Times, TV stars Democrats what the Jimmy Kimmel suspension says about free speech. The New York Times, Trump actions, clemency plus no fines. The SEC drops efforts to recoup funds from Trump clemency recipients. The New York Times, Trump actions against scientific data collection. Trump administration stopping efforts to collect scientific data. The New York Times, Trump actions versus the Federal Reserve. Trump asks Supreme Court to allow removal of Fed governor. The New York Times, Trump Kirk actions, Kirk and online rage plus inside the Trump chip flip plus this week in AI. The New York Times, Trump Kirk actions, the Kirk base was young people, now his tent might be expanding. The New York Times, Trump Kirk actions, the Kirk influence on his followers started well before college. The New York Times, Trump Kirk actions, opinion political violence is not new. The Trump response to it is the New York Times, Trump Kirk actions opinion. Should we listen to the AI doomsayers? The New York Times, Trump Kirk actions opinion, the Trump chilling efforts to punish free speech. The New York Times, Trump Kirk actions opinion, we can no longer tell ourselves this is not really happening. The New York Times, Trump Kirk actions opinion, what will the American story be after Trump? The New York Times, Trump lawsuit tossed. Judge dismisses the Trump $15 billion lawsuit against the New York Times. The New York Times, Trump versus universities. Trump officials question the Harvard stability, saying federal inquiries raise financial risk. The New York Times, Trump war draft bill would authorize Trump to kill people he deems narco-terrorists. The New York Times, Trump war fight erupts over fate of U.S. attorney investigating 2 Trump foes. The New York Times, for unions, United States dissent against leader Shawn Fain, who pledged to reform UAW, faces internal dissent. The New York Times, Shawn Fain, who pledged to reform UAW, faces internal dissent. Dissidents are seeking to oust Fain as president of the United Automobile Workers Union as he prepares to run for election again next year. Shawn Fain, president of the United Automobile Workers Union, is credited with leading strikes in 2023 that produced major wage gains, but dissidents say he is wasting the money of the union. Excerpts edited by Rozep for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, September 15, 2025. 2 years ago, Shawn Fain led the United Automobile Workers Union through simultaneous strikes at 3 large car makers, a strategy that helped produce big gains in wages and benefits for the members of the union. Fain was hailed by progressives and Democratic politicians like former President Biden, who saw him as the vanguard of a new generation of labor leaders who could get more workers to sign up to join unions, reversing the long slide in the ranks of the labor movement. He campaigned for Biden and later former Vice President Kamala Harris and exchanged insults with President Trump. Now, however, a small but vocal faction in the UAW is gearing up for a long-shot bid to oust Fain as he prepares to run for election again next year. The main complaints of the dissident workers about Fain are rooted in internal union matters like budgets and his treatment of other union officials rather than in grand philosophical disagreements about labor and political issues. The people seeking to oust him say that he has spent too much of the money of the union on organizing campaigns in the South and other initiatives they consider misguided. They contend that he has improperly stripped 2 board members of critical duties and say he failed to prevent a Michigan-based automaker from laying off thousands of workers. Fain was narrowly elected president in 2023. A vote overseen by Borofsky. Fain dismissed the complaints about what had happened with Ms. Mock and Boyer as garden variety disputes. Whether it is corporate boards or union boards, every leadership body has its disagreements, he said. Most of the executive board of the union said in a statement this summer that they stood by the decision to relieve Ms. Mock of some of her duties. Fain said the dissidents would not distract him from working to win a new contract with GE Aerospace, where 600 UAW members are on strike in Ohio and Kentucky. I am confident with the work we have done, and I think the majority of our members understand understand that he said. 5 United States Congress Democrats and Senate not on board for Trump funding bill. Trump live updates government shutdown looms as Senate Democrats block funding bill. The New York Times excerpts edited by RFK for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, September 19, 2025. Senate Republicans and Democrats on Friday each blocked the plan of the other side to keep the government open past the end of the month. The two votes increased the likelihood of a shutdown on October 1st. The House passed a Republican-supported bill that would keep funding mostly at current levels through November 21st. The Democratic alternative would extend funding through October 31st and reverse some healthcare cuts. Neither side won the 60 votes necessary in the Senate to move ahead. Senate Democrats just blocked the GOP proposal to fund the government, passed a September 30th deadline. A bill that already passed the House demanding concessions on healthcare and other issues in exchange for their support to avert a shutdown. All Democrats except Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania voted against the Republican plan. 2 Republicans broke party lines and also opposed the measure. Senators Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Rand Paul of Kentucky. Senate Republicans just blocked the Democratic proposal to keep the government funded through October 31st, add more than $1 trillion to extend Obamacare subsidies that are set to expire at the end of the year, and roll back Medicaid and other health program cuts that Republicans included in their marquee tax cut and domestic policy law. Lawmakers must find a compromise to keep the government funded ahead of a September 30th deadline, or the government will shut down. The Republican bill is a clean, nonpartisan, short-term continuing resolution to fund the government to give us time to do the full appropriations process, said Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the majority leader. And the Democrat bill is the exact opposite. It is what you might call not a clean continuing resolution, CR. It is a dirty CR laden down with partisan policies and appeals to the leftist base of the Democrats. Democrats argue that their plan includes vital measures to help Americans deal with healthcare costs if the Obamacare tax credits are allowed to lapse. Around 4 million people are projected to lose coverage starting in 2026, and prices would go up for around 20 million more. The Congressional Budget Office has projected that 10 million more Americans would become uninsured by 2034 as a result of the health cuts in the new tax law. The Democratic stopgap spending plan also would restrict the Trump ability to unilaterally claw back funding Congress previously approved, a power that Trump has repeatedly invoked. In March, the last time Congress faced a government funding deadline, Senate Democrats agonized for days over whether to allow Republican stopgap measure to move forward. They ultimately allowed it to advance, prompting an outpouring of anger from liberal voters and activists who had urged their leaders to deny their votes in protest of the Trump assault on the federal bureaucracy and unilateral defunding of programs. This time, Democrats have not hesitated to signal their refusal to go along with Trump, and Republicans arguing that they are in a much different position after passage of the tax cut and domestic policy bill. That measure, Schumer said, is highly unpopular with the American people. Democrats are unified. He went on, we have been strong on the same message for a very long time, which is we need to help the American people lower their costs, particularly on healthcare. Women Rape Crisis Center history. Susan Zanarios, who transformed rape crisis response, dies at 79. The New York Times Canada Theater plays Come From Away will be the most produced show in the U.S. this season. The New York Times Colombia. Trump administration questions Colombia against drug efforts and weighs cutting aid. The New York Times United Kingdom Trump actions nuclear power. America and Britain are worlds apart on energy policies except nuclear. The New York Times Europe versus Russia. Europe announces new sanctions to ramp up pressure on Russia. The New York Times Estonia, NATO member. Russian aggression. Russian fighter jets enter airspace of Estonia, a NATO member. The New York Times France. Paris crime suspect in 1982 attack on Jewish deli in Paris is arrested by Palestinian authorities. The New York Times Afghanistan hostages Taliban releases British couple Peter and Barbie Reynolds detained for months in Afghanistan. The New York Times Sudan, dozens killed in missile strike on Sudan mosque, harrowing beyond description. The New York Times West Africa versus Ghana. Trump actions. West Africans deported by the United States sue Ghana for rights violations. The New York Times China, how Xi is using a TikTok trade-off to court Trump. The New York Times China, Trump suggests China may have approved a TikTok deal without details. The New York Times headlines. The Guardian, September 19, 2025. Consumers travel in a group, a truly authentic experience that benefits everyone. The community travel experiences that are the favorites of readers. Ethical holidays. The Guardian, generations. United States, the 5 p.m. dinner crowd. Why are young Americans eating so early? Life and style. The Guardian, human interest is a memory palace. Actually useful. It helped me memorize the first 20 digits of pi. Well, actually. The Guardian. 6. Kamala Harris autobiographical story of her campaign for president in 2024. Angry and disappointed Kamala Harris critical of Joe Biden. In new book Kamala Harris, The Guardian. In 107 days, Kamala Harris lays out her regrets. In her book, coming out next week, she revisited her breakneck campaign, explaining her choices and outlining missteps of hers and others she hinted at a return to politics. I did not have enough time, Kamala Harris wrote of her campaign against Trump. Excerpts edited by RFK for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, September 19, 2025. Kamala Harris has revealed she was angry and disappointed when Joe Biden called her hours before her U.S. presidential debate with Trump to suggest powerful associates of the brother of Biden refused to support her. The former vice president and Democratic nominee recounts the episode and other criticisms of Biden in her campaign memoir 107 Days. Harris writes that in September, she was in a hotel room in Philadelphia poised to take on Trump in a potentially decisive debate when the then president called to wish her good luck and to ask if she would be back in Philadelphia before the election. Harris wondered why Biden would ask such a non sequitur. According to the book, he told her, my brother called. He has been talking to a group of real power brokers in Philly. He offered several names and asked if Harris knew them. She did not. Harris writes, then he got to his point. His brother had told him that those guys were not going to support me because I had been saying bad things about him. He was not inclined to believe it. He claimed the then vice president asked Biden to put the group in touch with her directly, but he was not done with the call. He sought to rewrite the history of his own disastrous debate performance against Trump 3 months earlier. Joe then rattled on about his own former debate performances. I beat him the other time. I was not feeling well in that last one. He continued to to insist that his debate performance had not hurt him much with the electorate. I was barely listening. Harris goes on to reflect that her debate against Trump would be like a big prize fight with huge consequences for America and the world, and she needed to be at the top of her game. She writes of Biden, I just could not understand why he would call me right now and make it all about himself. Her husband, Doug Emhoff, could see how angry and disappointed I was. Let it go. He said he knew I had to redirect my focus. Do not worry about him. You are dealing with Trump. Let it go. During the campaign and in its aftermath, Harris had avoided criticism of the president. She served beside and defended him amid questions about his mental acuity, but in 107 days, she lays bare tensions between the two when the Supreme Court overturned the Roe v. Wade decision on abortion in 2022. For example, Joe struggled to talk about reproductive rights in a way that met the gravity of the moment. Harris acknowledges there was a distinction between the Biden ability to govern and to campaign, and that she had concerns about the latter. His voice was no longer strong, his verbal stumbles more frequent. She writes there was an awkward meeting on July 4th when Biden was facing growing calls to step aside after his feeble debate performance. Harris hugged him and notes that he felt so frail while Emhoff was led away to see the First Lady at the time, Jill Biden. Doug runs cool. He is slow to anger, but I could tell something had gotten to him. Later, he unloaded. They hide you away for 4 years, give you impossible jobs, do not correct the record when those tasks are mischaracterized, never fight back. When you are attacked, never praise your accomplishments. Now, finally, they know you are an asset and they need you to reassure the American people, and still they have to ask if we are loyal? Harris had felt similar frustrations, recalling how she was once castigated by the Biden team for apparently delivering a speech too, while their thinking was zero-sum. If she is shining, he is dimmed. Biden bowed to the inevitable and dropped out of the election race on July 21st, then endorsed Harris. Campaign advisors urged her to distance herself from the president. She had just over 3 months to fight Trump and his army of right-wing influencers. At the end of July, the Republican nominee falsely claimed that Harris, whose mother was Indian and father is Jamaican, happened to turn black a few years ago, a remark that blew up all over the media. Harris told a campaign aide that she was not going to take the Trump bait. Louisiana Medicine and Science. Louisiana reports 5 deaths from flesh-eating bacterium in coastal waters. Louisiana. The Guardian. Medicine and Science. Gut health. More kissing, less kimchi. 7 surprising ways to boost your gut health well-being. The Guardian. 7A RFK Junior vaccine panel drops plan for vote on newborn hepatitis B shots, according to the Guardian. 7B. According to the PBS Newshour September 19, 2025, the panel declined to require a prescription for the COVID-19 vaccine. Rosette view photo of a woman in a gray suit jacket speaks into a microphone while seated at a table. RFK Junior anti-vaccine fight and U.S. fear for public health. Key moments from the testimony of the ousted CDC director. Read more excerpts edited by Rosette for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian. September 19, 2025. A revamped panel of U.S. vaccine advisors appointed by the Health Secretary RFK Junior on Friday decided not to go ahead with a planned vote that would have delayed the first hepatitis B vaccine dose for newborns, citing inconsistency in the proposed policy changes. It was not clear how the committee would now proceed on the issue. The group, which advises the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on U.S. vaccination schedules, on Thursday discussed changing the American more than 3 decades old recommendation that babies receive the shot at birth, which has led to a dramatic decrease in rates of the disease. While many committee members appeared to support the change during that discussion, medical experts and patient advocates warned during the public comment period that it would leave infants vulnerable to disease. Some committee members early on Friday raised new concerns about some of the data CDC presented and wanted to extend the recommendations from 1 month to 2 to 3 months. During the discussion Thursday, it was not clear how the 1-month criterion had been chosen. Dr. Catherine Troisi, infectious disease epidemiologist at UT Health Houston, said the U.S. birth dose policy drove a 97% decline in acute hepatitis B among Americans under 19. The panel did, however, vote unanimously to recommend universal hepatitis B testing for all pregnant women. The meeting will also later consider updates to COVID-19 vaccine guidance. The votes came as the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices ACIP reconvened for a second day of meetings that have highlighted deep divisions over the future of U.S. immunization schedules under Kennedy, who has long promoted claims about vaccine harms that run contrary to scientific evidence. On Thursday, the panel rejected use of the combined measles, mumps, rubella, varicella shot in children under 4, citing a small increase in seizure risk, opting instead for separate doses. CDC experts presenting at the meeting have defended the long-standing policy of giving hepatitis B vaccine within 24 hours of birth, noting that 12% to 16% of pregnant women in the U.S. have no record of hepatitis B testing. Pediatrician Dr. Cody Meissner, a panel member, warned that delaying the birth dose could increase the risk of harm based on no evidence of benefit. He added that while no vaccine was completely risk-free or fully effective, clinicians must weigh the benefits against potential side effects for the newborn hepatitis B vaccine. There is no doubt the protective benefits far outweigh any possible risks. Meissner said the ACIP reconstituted this year by Kennedy includes several members who have previously raised concerns about routine vaccines. Kennedy has also steered broader policy shifts, cutting routine COVID-19 shots for children and pregnant women, and halting nearly $500 million in mRNA projects. 5 of the members began their terms on Monday. Trump Kirk actions. Dozens of workers disciplined after the Kirk shooting, from journalists to Jimmy Kimmel. The Kirk shooting. The Guardian. Trump Kirk actions. U.S. House passes resolution to honor Kirk in vote that divided Democrats. House of Representatives. The Guardian. Trump Kirk action. A U.S. neo-Nazi Fight Club is using the Kirk killing to recruit new members. Far-right U.S. The Guardian. Trump and Republicans against pollution mitigation and health protection for troops. Republicans try to gut protections against the U.S. military. PFAS pollution. U.S. military. The Guardian. Trump tariffs. The Trump response to a court decision on tariffs is bonkers, even for him. Stephen Greenhouse. The Guardian. Vermont. When even Ben and Jerry cannot speak out, it is clear the era of corporate responsibility is over. Austin Sherratt. The Guardian. United States House of Representatives passes spending bill, and it is sent to the Senate. House passes spending bill as Democrats protest healthcare cuts. We do not work for Trump. U.S. politics. The Guardian. 8. United States Senate fails to pass short-term funding bill that would avert government shutdown. U.S. Politics Live excerpts edited by RFK for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian, September 19, 2025. Senate fails to pass short-term funding bill that would avert government shutdown. Senate rejects the Democratic alternative stopgap funding measure. House passes stopgap funding bill to avert government shutdown. Senate fails to pass short-term funding bill that would avert government shutdown. The Republican-controlled Senate has failed to pass a short-term funding bill that would prevent a government shutdown at the end of the month. Earlier, continuing resolution CR cleared the House, but ultimately stalled in the upper chamber, unable to reach the 60 votes needed to overcome the filibuster. Democrats remain resolute that they will continue to block any bill if it does not include significant amendments to health care provisions. Today, Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was the lone Democrat to vote for the GOP-drawn CR, while Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky joined their Democratic colleagues across the aisle and voted no. Australia, human interest: how I learned to stop worrying and love the snakes in my seal. Australian lifestyle. The Guardian, United Kingdom for Ukraine and against Russia. Outgoing MI6 chief says Putin has bitten off more than he can chew in Ukraine. Espionage. The Guardian, United Kingdom. Republicans in the United States and the right wing in the United Kingdom. Trump has dragged the U.S. to the abyss, and Nigel Farage would do the same to Britain. Here is how to stop him. Jonathan Friedland. The Guardian, United Kingdom. Trump visit Martin Rauzen on Keir Starmer in the aftermath of the Trump visit. Cartoon Martin Rauzen. The Guardian. Estonia is a member of NATO. Now Estonia requests NATO Article 4 consultation after unacceptable violation of its airspace by Russian MiG-31s. Europe Live. Estonia. Russian aggression. NATO intercepts Russian fighter jets on a reckless violation of Estonian airspace. Estonia. The Guardian. Germany. Travel walking and feasting on the German shore of Lake Constance. Germany holidays. The Guardian. Trinidad and Tobago oil depletion. A defining moment. Trinidad and Tobago at a crossroads as oil runs out. Trinidad and Tobago. The Guardian. New Zealand. We are losing so many mothers to childbirth and genocide. It is our responsibility to act on both. Jacinda Ardern. The Guardian. The Netherlands. Pollution and recycling. Removal of litter bins. The Amsterdam answer to its rubbish crisis. Remove some of the litter bins. Netherlands. The Guardian. China deal to transfer TikTok to U.S. control unresolved despite Trump. She called TikTok. The Guardian. China. Trump megadonor privately mocked his claim to have upper hand with China. The Guardian. Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's Corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies, which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American. Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. RFK view. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions. Yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burn tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burn tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burn tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom. The Eco-Design Wood Stove and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RFK view. Purple air. PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.